distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, friends and family. I'd like to introduce to you all, or first, I want to thank you all for being here, taking the time out of your day to listen to me present. This is the first part in spreading knowledge, what I would like to call American corruption. My name is Jake. I will be presenting Slavery 1.5, The Untold Truths of Dead Peonage. Recently, I read an article that came out late June. It was about a white couple. They adopted 5 black children under their care, ages 6 to 16. The issue there is they used each and every one of them for slave labor. They had a plantation in West Virginia. They had a few white kids, but they did not make them do any of this hard labor. They only made the black children out to be this way. They locked them into rooms with no way out. According to the sheriff's department, quote, the children had no means to exit the barn on their own, no running water, no bathing facilities, and were obviously deprived of adequate hygienic care and food. They were, at least some of these children, were here for upwards of 8 years. The defense said that they had black children in their care for upwards of 8 years. I believe this should be marked as a national tragedy, having this level of a miscarriage of justice right under our very noses. But it does pose an interesting question in the way of progress. People like to celebrate progress. Say there's something which is common in societies. Champions of progress. We progress forward. For God's sakes, progressives come from the word progress. But I would like to say, a rebuttal to that, I would like to say that progress has not in fact come at all. Progress assumes that it's in a good state. If you want to go on a scale, it goes from bad to good or medium to good. Change just means it has to be different. It can go from bad to less bad. It can go from a bad to a different kind of bad. It can even go from bad to worse. Wink, wink. Because, just as Malcolm X said, if someone stabbed you in the back with a 9-inch knife and pulls it out 3 inches, you wouldn't call that progress, would you? The knife is still in your back. It's not progress to you take that knife out and try to heal that wound. Then you're at the stage of progress. Then you have, and then and only then have you progressed forward. But many of us won't even like to pretend that the knife is even in our backs, because we've been systematically taught as a society that it is not there. We have been systematically told that we live in a post-racism world where slavery was done away with in 1865. But that is simply not the case. I believe it is so important to speak on this for that very reason, because it is so underreported, because this yesterday is so underknown. It's how we got here. You can't understand a book if you only read the last 3 chapters. You cannot understand a painting if you only look at it through a keyhole. So why do we expect ourselves to understand our current prison slavery system if we don't examine the whole vastness of it, if we don't see what the current one came from, if we don't see the roots of it? These very hidden histories, I talked to history professors who specialize in African American history. Not even they knew about these things. They only knew about the Jim Crow parts, the ideas of it being the era of Jim Crow and the era of segregation. But they don't know what upheld it all, because we only know about these. These are the ones we focus on mainly in schools. When I was in school just a few years ago, like in public education, it was only exclusively these. I did not hear, I think, a single word uttered of chain gangs or comic leasing, or about the worst of all of them, the one that upheld everything, the one that allowed everything to function. I think we can all guess what that is based on the title of this presentation. I am speaking about the era of debt peonage, which has been marked and noted as, quote, a condition worse than slavery. And I promise that by the end of this presentation, I can prove without a shadow of a reasonable doubt that progress has not in fact come at all in the last few centuries, especially not in the last century. I'm going to be showing my progress hasn't come by showing these experiences. And I want you to all just think in the back of your head, if just a few details were removed, just a few things were omitted, would you even be able to tell the difference between that an antebellum slavery, meaning pre-Civil War slavery. And I'm going to be sharing what some of these details are, the parts that we often don't learn about in schools, the things that make you too uncomfortable, and dispel ideas that we are taught too much. With that being said, I will give a warning right now, a trigger warning. I will be speaking about sexual assault in this presentation. I'll try and give a warning ahead of time for when that happens. As well as swearing, I will be swearing throughout this, at least a little bit, as well as just some of the words which humanity has to possibly offer. With that out of the way, here we go. First, I believe it's important to just do a quick definition of slavery. I define it as involuntary servitude, servitude in which you do not voluntarily choose to, pretty simple, right? But I also define it as a complete abandonment of viewing the humanity in others, seeing them as less than a human, seeing them as less than anything. And for the first case in this, let's turn to John Davis. He was a man, he just got off the train to see his sick wife before Constable Robert Franklin approached him, saying, "Hey, have you got any money?" Davis responded with, "I have some, but not for you." The constable responded with, "When are you going to pay me the money you owe me?" Davis responded with, "I don't owe you anything." A short standoff ensued, in which no words were given, until Davis broke the silence, telling him that you can either arrest me or I'm not giving you a cent of what I have. This stunned the constable, not expecting this to happen, and soon backed off. He would have hoped that this would be the last time he'd have to deal with this sort of issue. But just a few hours later, after he was reunited with his wife, Francis M. Pruitt said that he came with a warrant, but he would not say what that warrant said. He would not say what Davis committed when Davis asked to see it. He said he had to come with him to town if he wanted to see it. Now, Davis knew what this meant. He knew what would happen if he came to town with him. But as the author put it, quote, if necessary, he would simply submit to whatever the white man demanded. It was a dance every black man in the South was being forced to learn. To resist only invited far worse. And this far worse would be seen throughout this presentation. In another case, Cornelia Hammock, a woman who pled innocent, and she was sentenced to 18 months of hard labor. She died after 2 days of work. 2 days. And this was not rare, keep in mind. But I think the most tragic, most damning, and the most villainous part of all of this is what would have happened to her family. What if she had children? What if she said goodnight to her children and said, "I'll see you in the morning," and they never saw their mother again? What if they went at the door every single day to see their mom and she never reappeared? They would go up in anger, in anguish of what happened. What if she had a husband or a partner? Wondering, what did I do to you that you would leave without a word's notice? That you would leave me all alone? What if she had parents? They would be worried, sick, day after day, week after week, and month after month, what happened to their little girl. Because the families almost never knew what happened to their family members. They never knew what happened to them. It would take years in many cases. It would have to require them to actually find their families again after being left. And this was not rare at all. Archer and Q.F. Lewis, they were children aged 12 and 10 respectively. That is it. That is all the information we have on these two children who were forced into slavery. We know their names, we know their age, we know their sex, and we can infer their race. That is all. We don't know anything else about their stories. We don't know anything else about their lives. What if they were literally taken out of their mother's arms? What if they were just out playing a game in the street and then they were taken? What if they were just at home and then kidnapped right from there? We do not know. And not even all these people have their names left. Not even all these people have that dignity to have their names be recognized. The first man, he was just walking down the street with his wife and kid before he was stopped over a petty offense. He had a gun on him, which was surprisingly legal during this time for black people to have. But the officer did not care. He saw that gun. He saw that the man was not reaching for it, and he still opened fire and killed that man in front of his wife and child. Without a moment's hesitation, because he could. The next man, a very similar fate. He was accused of stealing, He complied with the officer, and he was still killed in front of crowds of people. They did nothing wrong. All they did was, well, I guess commit the cardinal sin of being alive and black. That is it. Now, these are just lynchings. I think we can all agree. These are just straight lynchings. So why am I talking about this? I'm talking about hidden histories, right? But it's because I believe we need to hear the details. We need to hear the things we aren't taught about. We need to hear how stupid it is. Look at Tulsa. A man literally tripped and fell, and because of that, an entire town was razed to hell. It can take that little for so much harm to befall. We must hear the details of lynchings. We must hear the details of slavery. Now, for this next one, I will give a warning. This is where the sexual assault warning comes from. I try to keep it very brief, but it is very much used. There was a woman, her father, he could not read, and he was coerced into signing a contract which would give over their land to the new now white owners. After they did so, they were unable to leave. They were forced to stay as peons. They were forced by what was essentially a Fugitive Slave Act. Because during this time, if you were advanced your money beforehand, or they had a debt paid off, then you were not allowed to leave that contract. And if you did, they could go and catch you. They could go and retrieve you by any means necessary. They were forced by whips and chains. They were forced to do as these people wanted. And here again, I'll give a trigger warning. This woman, this little girl, she was raped starting at the age of 5 years old. At the age of 5, by, quote, whatever men were present, day in, day out, month after month, and year after year, she was subjected to this torment. And she was told, if she told her dad, he would be dead before sunrise. They were given no money. They were given no pay and food. Quote, they beat us. They didn't feed us. We had to go drink water out of the creek. They had to survive eating leftovers and wild animals. Quote, they treated the dogs a whole lot better than they treated us. Because slaves were seen as like cattle or horses. You don't really care about them. You don't have, at least most of the time, you don't have like an emotional bond to it. But it's expensive, you know? You don't want to work it until it dies because it's expensive. But a peons were cheap. That is why peons were hammers. You can work it and work it and work it until it breaks. If it breaks, who cares? You can always just get another one because they're cheap. That is why it was worse. That was why it was a condition worse than slavery, because it was allowed to be, because there was no money involved with it that they would lose. Now this, I think we can all agree, this is just straight slavery. And the courts agreed. The court said that this was actually an issue of slavery and not an issue of debt peonage when this was all brought to trial. But what was this debt I've talked about? What did it mean to live as a peon? What does this term mean? For that, I believe it's easiest to show it through a pipeline or a slight float. It starts with a slave catcher. It can be a police officer, a bounty hunter, constable, justice of the peace. And since it could be a justice of the peace, it could be basically anyone. It could be a tavern owner. It could be a mechanic. It could be a merchant. It could be a shop owner. It could be a drunk who would pick fights on a daily basis. If they would still have this power. Now, once there was this slave catcher, all they have to do is see a black person they want, or even better, be sent after one directly by one of the slave owners. After which they would approach them, arrest them, or as more realistically, kidnap them. Once they did so, they would bring them to a quote-unquote court, which was 99% of the time just another justice of the peace. And there's a reason I didn't separate these. I don't think I read a single case where they were brought to court and not sentenced. That just did not happen. To recap this, essentially this is what happened. Have a slave catcher, they see someone, they kidnap them, they sentence them. It's really that simple. Now this is the part where it diverges slightly. You will either go to the convict leasing / chain gang system. But this, what essentially it is that you'll go to prison and the state will lease you out. The slave owner will have to pay a weekly or monthly amount to keep you. Debt peonage, you would just directly buy them from the courts. They wouldn't go to prison, they would go directly from the court to the owner. This will allow them to cut out the middleman. No more leasing, just a one-time amount, and they're yours now. Sometimes they would even skip these trial courts. They would just have them on site, on payroll. This is why it was the most exploitable. It was a direct line into servitude. It was the best to invest in. Because you could have situations where this person was a justice of the peace who was hired by the slave owner, and this one was also one, hired by the exact same person. This is why they would find someone to be sent afterward, because they paid everyone. It was an inescapable system meant to do this. And then once they did so, they would force a labor contract to be signed. I'll give you the example of what John Davis had to sign, but they're all very similar. You have to consent to be, quote, locked up in a cell at night. Quote, if Pace advanced me anything over and above what he's already furnished me, I agree to work for him under this contract until I have paid in full. And the most dastardous of them all, the worst of all, quote, Pace is hereby authorized to hire me out to any person, firm, or corporation in the state of Alabama. It was completely legal for them to buy someone and then sell them, if so happened they break their labor contract. But what did that mean? It could be anything, because they can't read these contracts. How are they supposed to? They can't really go to a school that would teach them, and their parents don't know how to read because they haven't been allowed to for centuries. As well as the fact they could just make contracts up on the spot. They did that systematically. Sometimes with slaves, their tenure was over, they would walk off the plantation and then be arrested again for apparently wearing the clothes given by the slave owner. And if they gave the clothes back, they'd probably just be arrested for indecent exposure. There's nothing they could do to get out of this. They could whip them because they, quote unquote, consented to it. They could be a slave. Quote, it always been named Pace owned Davis, as the author put it. You could even be born into it. You could be born into this system. It was all just theatrics. That's it. That's the only thing that set this apart from true slavery. So then it's time that I cut my theatrics, because I've also been using theatrics on this entire time. I've not been fully truthful during this presentation. Now for that, let's go back a little bit. Two of these names, you all know them. I can say that with basically 100% confidence. These two, you all know them well. This one, you should all know. Everyone should know them, but very few do. She is an American hero who is known by very few. Her name is May Louise Walls Miller. And I'll give again here a trigger warning for essay. She was a slave born in 1943 and enslaved until the age of 18. She was raped then for 13 years straight. It was so bad, she was left infertile. She could not have children after what she went through. She tried to run at the age of 9 years old, but couldn't. I was, quote, they'll kill us. As well as the fact, quote, what could you run to? We thought everybody was in the same predicament. It took until 1961 for her to just be fed up with it, for her to be free. She wouldn't do it anymore, because she was threatened by her own. She was threatened with her life. Quote, I remember thinking, they're just going to have to kill me today, because I'm just not doing this anymore. Her aunt helped her sneak away in 1961. And they were able to do this because the whites had so much power. They were too afraid to do anything because what could they do? Quote, the sheriff, the constable, all of them worked together. So Peanuts had no outlet to talk to anyone under Peanuts. It was so bad in the early 20th century when the federal government actually pursued this, they couldn't do anything because the people were too afraid to speak. They knew what would happen if they talked. The federal government wouldn't go far enough. Even they had to falter under the strength of the white people during this time. So I need to ask, did emancipation even come then? She was enslaved until 1961. Quote, matter of fact, I thought everybody was living that way. She had no way of knowing. Emancipation did not come for 136 years after 1865 with the 13th Amendment. She didn't know. A woman held in abject slavery did not know until 2001 that what she went through was not normal and what she went through was not legal. That's how long it took. So in a few years, she went to court. In 2003, she and her 6 siblings joined a lawsuit for reparations. But in 2004, this lawsuit was dropped. She died August 24th, 2014. This woman who was a slave died less than 10 years ago. Every single person in this room was alive during that. Every single one. We were all alive during the era of a literal slave. And I believe she was a slave held legally because the courts did nothing to give back to her. No reparations were given. The state affirmed it with that, and there was no punishment dished out at all to the family that did this. Always the name, it was legal. Now, these next two are even better because I said you don't know them, and you do. The first man, the man. Oh, isn't it weird though how I included lynching in a talk about hidden history? Because it technically isn't what we consider lynchings. Because the first man, the man who was just walking and had a gun on him, his name was Philando Castile, a man who died 8 years ago. And the second one, the man who listened to the officers and was accused of stealing, his name was George Floyd. How is it possible that I could sneak in George Floyd and Philando Castile, two people who died in these cities, in the Twin Cities, less than a decade ago? One of them was less than 4 years ago and made worldwide headlines. How is it possible I could sneak them in and talk about the 1900s? That's none the wiser. It is because it hasn't changed. It is indistinguishable. Besides just a few service level details, such as, well, they were driving, or people were recording, or there was body cam footage. There's really no difference. The actual experiences and things went through them is not different. The dehumanization is not gone. It has barely even had to change form because there has been no progress. And we can see this through these experiences. We can see that through just how similar they are, and how similar they have stayed throughout the decades. They have not changed for centuries. So now what? What do we do after being confronted by this, especially in our state? We've seen these two cases. What do we do in response to a vast network of corruption, which is taking the lives of millions and millions and millions of Black people? We need to understand the enemy. We need to understand the system so we can fully dismantle it by education, which is what we're doing right now. We need to understand who it's for. It's not for me, it's not for you, it's not for any of us. It is for May Louise Walls and others. It is for Philando Castile. It's for George Floyd, Hazel Slaughter, John Davis, No Turk, and Khalif Browder, and so many millions of others who I was not able to talk about today. It is for them. It is for the slaves who have been held legally in this country. Because in the future, what are we going to tell the other generations of what we did? What do we do to help end this corruption? What are we going to tell them that we did? What was our part in this? Are we going to tell them, do we agree with them? Are we going to simply say that, yes, I believe that slavery is a bad thing? Are we going to say, yes, I agree, slavery should not be practiced? Or are we going to do more to help end slavery? When we look back, what are we going to say that we did in fight to end this corruption? Or should we stand up to it to fully be able to end it? I'm not asking any of you here to give you 100%. Very few have that luxury. I'm not asking for your 75%, 50%, 40, 35, 20, 15, 10, or even your 5%. I'm simply asking for your 1% to help end slavery. One of the worst crimes which could possibly be committed all of human history. It doesn't get much worse than slavery. So what are we going to do to stop it? We can only do this if we come all together in true and full solidarity. We must end this multi-generational fight, which isn't even close to being over. Each day, more and more people lose their fields. More and more people lose their lives. More and more people lose days out of their life, lose what will amount to the rest of their lives. More children will lose their fathers and mothers. More parents will lose their daughters and sons. More people will lose their family. More people will lose their friends. More people will lose everything. People thought it was over in 1865. Anti-slavery associations basically all disbanded after the 13th Amendment because they believed the fight was over. They believed that they could pack it up and that There was nothing more to fight for. But it is not. We must go further. We must stomp it out and give reparations for what has been committed to the American people. To be what has been committed to slaves in America. We must accomplish this by any means necessary. Then and only then will it take a nation of millions to hold us back. Because if they want to stop us from ending slavery, they'll have to do it. Because eventually, if we do not stand up, if we do not stop this, we'll all be subject to the same conditions. And if we don't, we'll all be doomed. Real. Thank you. Now, here are my sources. I have these ones for the first part, these ones for the other part. Now, does anyone have any questions?
I had one question, but you kind of answered it, and that was how does peonage still exist?
My friend brought up an interesting idea. He brought up the idea that the American people at large are almost in a situation of peonage, especially due to vagrancy. Vagrancy was one of the main reasons peonage was allowed at first, because if someone was homeless, they could arrest them and force them into servitude. It was that simple, and it's the same thing today. You're forced to work day after day, month after month, and if you're homeless, you'll be sent to prison. The American people are, in a sense, then being held in a similar state of peonage. They must work or else be imprisoned and lose their freedoms, and then again be forced to work day in and day out.
Also, I heard a proposal in there. I was wondering if there's like a legal lawsuit that is associated with some of these concepts that is worth studying or looking into.
When I said that the courts said that it was slavery and not peonage,
Yes,
that is a good point, and I have the research for that. I simply don't have the time. For that, that would require another speech for me to delve into. Now, could you come up here and present your first?
Sure. Absolutely. Hello, everyone online. Hello, everyone in the room. I'd like to thank our speaker, Jake, for his amazing illustration on concerns in life that are very challenging to describe and are very interesting concepts. I'd also like to thank Democratic Socialists of America Twin Cities chapter for hosting this event. I appreciate that. My name is Matthew Emerson from the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee. And we first and foremost, we support this illustration through an educated lens. We think this is an important part of history that isn't being talked about. That's one of the reasons why we're in support of Jake's work in any way we can, including making an appearance today. What we do and what we've been doing for the last 15 years is working to end incarceration in Minnesota through a lens of abolition. We're abolitionists in spirit and in study, and the goal for that abolition practice is to see the prison population reduce, the policies amend to give better care for prisoners in Minnesota, and eventually see the ending of traditional imprisonment in the state of Minnesota and around the world. How do we do that? We do that through policy advocacy on every level of government, as well as public information, community education, and also activism in the street when it comes appropriate. For example, around the deaths with COVID, we spoke out and policies were changed to make it easier for people to not die from COVID in prison. Simple concepts that you need to have somebody there to come and speak about, otherwise nobody knows and nothing gets changed and people are harmed in silence. And so that's part of our work, and I thought that was important to share tonight. In addition, we are supporting Jake with a book study. The first book study will be August 30th, which is a Friday night, just like today, from 6:30 to 7:30. We can host that at a to be determined location, either in North Minneapolis or at one of our offices in Bloomington. And we're working on propelling some of Jake's research by having community members join us in doing some of the book study aspects of the work. There is a lot of research that Jake has done, and we want to acknowledge that, and we want to support it as a community. And that's part of the reason why we're here today. And so if anyone is interested in signing up, feel free to speak to me after the presentation, or if you're online, feel free to contact us at iwalktc.com or .org, iwalktc.com, and just drop in the link, Black History book study. Thank you.